You're all right now. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Saturday morning show. Welcome, Karen. How are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you. A little bit chilly, but got the heating on.
I know, got my cardigan on. So this morning we are going to be chatting about landlord legal errors and are you on the right side of the law, which I think more than ever is so important. I mean, it's always obviously paramount, but I think with just the amount of changes and um, legislation that's been implemented recently, it's so important to make sure that you are on the right side of the law, or have someone who's advising you on how to do that. Um, have you experienced, obviously, a lot of feedback for landlords and things about all the recent changes, Karen?
I think it can be quite hard for landlords to keep up with the recent changes that have been placed. Obviously, there's forever changing regulations when it comes to property compliances, so your safety certificates and just general day-to-day runnings of property, just to make sure that you're staying on the right side of your tenancy.
Yeah. I mean, every landlord needs to follow around about 170 different pieces of lettings legislation. So you're not alone if you're feeling bewildered by so many rules and regulations. And not just landlords, obviously, agents like ourselves, where we have letting agent registration and things, and a lot of stuff that we have to go through. We have to also be let well registered and things, which has as an ongoing upkeep and training and things to keep that valid. So there's a lot to contend with. So it's right to keep yourself on the right side of lettings law, or like I say, have someone in place who's competent and doing that for you. And even though we let and manage rental homes every day, we still need to set aside time to keep track of changes in the law and landlords' responsibilities. Like I say, obviously, with their own continual training. And to make sure we get everything right and done on time, we need to follow watertight systems, reminders, and checks. And that's on a daily basis, Karen.
It is. Things are changing so quickly just now. Where you could be regulations one day, there could be some new ones the next. So it's making sure that you're keeping up to date with when new ones are coming out. And like ourselves, we have to make sure that we are keeping up to date with everything because we manage properties for so many different landlords. So making sure that we are compliant and keeping their properties compliant is such a key aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think although there is quite a lot to contend with, I mean, does it mean that landlords find it difficult and find it maybe unprofitable? And the simple answer is no. But it can be time consuming when there's so much to know and so much to do. And you could also be fined or taken to court if you get things wrong. And I think that's one of the most important things here, that this is the law that is set out, and you do need to abide by it for your own sake, from a legal aspect, and also as a landlord and agents, we have a duty of care that I take very serious, and I know you do as well, Karen, towards tenants and their well-being and providing them the primary their home, really. So some of the biggest misunderstandings we'll see among landlords and tenants are some of the most important ones. Do you know, a lot of the common ones are most of the important ones. So this week we are going to cover what you can, what you can't do, and what are must and mustn't do's to keep you on the right side of the law for a smooth and successful tenancy. And ultimately, that's what everyone wants all round, whether it's agent, landlord, tenant. We all want things to run smoothly and to be a successful tenancy. We were touched on, obviously, there's been a lot of changes recently. Everybody will be, hopefully everybody who's involved in letting will be aware of the rent freezes at the moment and the moratorium on evictions, which has been brought in with this cost of living crisis act that has been implemented, which is quite similar to the Coronavirus Act, which we had brought in just obviously with the pandemic. And like I say, obviously the changes that come in not long after you come into lettings and things, Ken, we done all the let well training, and then landlord registration was already in place, but then we had letting agent registration. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing. And I mean, we might be a wee bit geeky about it because sometimes we find it quite interesting to, and obviously to keep up to date, we obviously do that quite a lot, and it's quite good to be knowledgeable and have that know of the lettings law, which we keep up to quite frequently we obviously update that all the time because we know how much it changes. And like I say, on the daily, we have to make sure that we are keeping up to date and make sure that our knowledge is up to date with what's changing and what the government, the Scottish government, is implementing.
Yes, it's a learning day in this job. But yeah, like you say, when I first started, it was very much like thrown in at the deep end because there were so many changes coming into force at that time. We had the change in tenancy agreements from short assured tenancies to private residential tenancies. We had the implementation of EICRs.
Yep.
We're now feeling that because it's now time for renewal for
It's the renewal time, yeah.
So there's so many changes, and it's making sure that we are keeping up to date on pretty much a daily basis for it.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's a lot of good topics to cover this morning. First one, we're going to look at the blanket bans on children and pets. Pets is a big one, a really important one. I think contrary to popular belief, you can actually decline tenants with children and pets. I know there's legislation and things that's due to be rolled out that will actually change that in the near future. But at the moment, that's how it stands. Not really a policy that I think we generally follow with children, but obviously pets as something that's always brought up and quite a common topic for discussion when it comes to choosing tenants and putting a tenant in place. However, these are often the tenants that stay the longest. Obviously, if you've got a family unit or if you've got people that have pets and things, they usually have quite a routine, want to be stable and in the same place for a considerably longer period of time, whether that be schools or do you know what I mean? People who don't have children, sometimes their pets are their children, and maybe if they find a property that's located maybe near to the beach or do you know what I mean, somewhere for walking, they're going to want to stay there. So sometimes they are the better tenants and stay the longest, and that's really what you want as long-term tenancies without void periods and things as well. You've got lesser changeovers and things and less costs, and generally a lot smoother running of a tenancy. But that doesn't mean you should accept just anyone, and there are times when it's right to refuse, politely, obviously, to do that, and with all the correct information in order to do that. So let's have a wee look at some of these scenarios, Karen. Do you want to run through some things? Obviously, you do front of house lettings all the time, so it'd be interesting to hear some of your points.
Yeah, so going through obviously the application process, one of our main objectives is to find the right tenant for a property. So making sure that we're taking into account who will be staying in the property, and if they do have any pets, this is obviously something we have to consider as well. Obviously, quite a lot of our landlords, we do advise them that to keep an open mind when it comes to pets, because obviously it does, like you say, if you've got a tenant with a pet, I mean, sometimes they look after the property great, there's no damage, and quite often, like you say, pets are people's babies now. So they are, obviously, it's kind of a different culture now of people really do look after their pets. Unfortunately, not everybody. So we do have to take things into consideration when it comes to pets. So making sure that we're finding the right fit for the property is key in this. So establishing how many pets somebody has, what type of pet that they have. So if somebody has like 10 cats or multiple dogs, it's obviously going to be a bit more of a struggle for them to find a landlord that's willing to accept that. But somebody that has one pet, maybe even two, is a lot more considerable for a landlord. But like I say, we do have to take into account how many pets they have and what type of pet that they have for it.
Yeah, I think things like, obviously, if it's a one-bedroom upper flat and somebody wants to have a big large dog or even two large dogs, it's just like that's not going to work. Or if it's maybe a higher rise flat and excuse me, and they have maybe several cats and things, and it's like, well, do you know what I mean? Is that going to be ideal? So it's definitely on an individual basis. I think it's always to look at. Like you say, Ken, we've got a lot of tenants with pets, and they look after them very well. We have tenants that have got several dogs, and they're all well looked after, and we check that the pets and the property are looked after. And 9 times out of 10, it's not really I would say most of the time, it's not really the pet that's the problem, it's the owner. As long as the pet's looked after correctly, then there shouldn't be any issues.
To be honest, over time, damage caused by children can I have by pets. So.
Yeah, I know.
It is, and like you say, it's making sure that a property is being, if you are going with somebody, regardless of if they have pets, if they have children, you should be doing property checks to make sure that your property is being looked after. and making sure that no damage is being caused by anybody that's staying in that property. But yeah, as we say, making sure that you're finding the right fit for the property. So taking into account if you have a garden, if you're in a flat, a house, these are all things that are considered when reviewing if a pet is suitable for the property. And landlords' preferences as well. Obviously, we can have some landlords that are allergic to pets, and ultimately their end goal is to eventually move back into their property once their tenancy ends. So obviously some situations we can't accept pets on that basis alone. So we've had that one before. Maybe somebody's been allergic to a cat, so it's been, right, I'll consider a dog for the property, but no cats, which unfortunately is fair enough. But it is very much on an individual basis. So obviously taking into account like tenants' lifestyle as well is something that we would have to consider.
Yeah.
So if their pets are being left alone for a very long period of time, it could lead to damage in the property or cause some destruction or disturbance to neighbours as well, which is something that you don't want.
Yeah, if pets are left all day and aren't really comfortable or used to that, they could, if it's a dog, bark, or do you know what I mean? And that could be disruptive to neighbours and things. And over a long period of time, that could be detrimental to the tenancy, especially if it's upsetting neighbours and noise and things like that as well. So that's something to consider. And I know a lot of people have pets that are crate trained and all the rest of it, and that's fine, but they need to be able to demonstrate and prove that that's going to be suitable for the tenancy.
So a landlord reference is something that can be quite beneficial if you have pets. Obviously, somebody that's willing to say, yes, there's not been any damage caused by this pet, I would rent to this person. Again, is always advantageous. Or obviously taking into account if somebody's working from home, obviously that pet's not really going to be left alone for very long periods of time because they'll be at home. Or like if a dog walker's coming in. So these are all things to take into consideration. And if you do have any pets and you're applying for properties, these are all things that are beneficial for you to mention to the agent if you're applying to or landlord, so they know exactly what your circumstances are when it comes to pets. So you're not being discounted on lack of information, basically.
Yeah, it's so important to establish as much information and background as possible. That is a key part of obviously the referencing process. And families and things as well. I mean, obviously family size and things could be.
Yes, so we have to watch for not overcrowding in properties, and also trying to find a family that the property is going to suit on more of a long-term basis to ensure that you're going to get the longest tenancy possible out of them if they are a good tenant. So making sure that you're taking into consideration how many adults and children will be staying in the property. So for example, if you have a family of 4, they are not going to be suitable for a 1-bedroom flat.
Yeah.
So ideally, for when it comes to children as well, we have to take into account the ages of them, if they're boys, if they're girls, to know whether that's going to be overcrowding, if they're going to effectively need their own space. So obviously taking bedrooms into account when referencing a family is quite an important one as well.
Yeah, that's really important, and we find that asking the right questions and using our experience and kind of intuition, it weeds out the best tenants. And it's not to say that we, which I hate and I've heard so much times, is cherry pick, and it's not what we do. And it's unfortunately with the high demand that we've had recently over the last year. That's been an accusation that I've heard so many times passed around about agencies and things, and it's not the case. It's just it may come across that it is maybe cherry picking, but that's not really the case, unfortunately. But
no, I think it's all about, like we say, finding the right fit for the property, and there's steps that we take in order to establish that. And unfortunately, it does mean that people aren't successful. But at the end of the day, a property can only go to one person.
Yeah.
So we do have to take all these kind of referencing steps into account to make sure that we're trying to find out the right person for that property to give the landlord the best tenant and that person the most suitable home for themselves.
Yeah, and I think when there's pets involved, and like you see, even our children, you see children cause quite a lot of damage. It needs to be clarified to tenants clearly at the beginning of the tenancy, whether that be an inventory and things, and also at the vacating process, how the property should be returned. And what that expectation is. And this protects the landlord and gives them obviously peace of mind as well if you are doing that as their agent. I've got a few comments coming through, so please comment and ask questions, guys. More than happy to do that while we are live this morning. Thanks for joining, Jeanette. Jeanette said Airbnb shambles with the Scottish Government. Each local authority interprets it differently. Now delayed as not considered a huge value to the economy for tourism. I know I've been listening to it in the news, Jeanette, as a bit of a shambles, like a lot of other things. And Jeanette's also jumped in and says, always had damage with pets, happy to have pets, but tenants have always sneaked them in to avoid professional cleaning at the end of the stay. Yeah, we've had that in the past as well, and it's something that you need to watch out for. And people having pets throughout the tenancy without having the approval to do that. Yeah.
Have that in the first place. So obviously when we have pets, this is in writing with our tenants. So we have terms at the start of their tenancy which establishes if they're going to have any pets at the property, who will be staying in the property, regarding like children, adults. So obviously we've established it and have it in writing from the first place as to if there is going to be pets and how many pets will be in the property.
Yeah.
I've had one before that I went in and their dog had puppies, and I think they were planning on keeping a few more than they should have. So it was going back and referring back to their paperwork and saying, look, this is how many pets you are allowed in the property. This is how much. So you will have to reconsider your situation, basically, which can be harsh at the time. But at the end of the day, that's what a tenant has agreed to in the first place. And obviously for a landlord's benefit as well, you cannot have somebody that is overrunning a property with pets.
No, and that's where inspections come in as well. We'll talk about tenancy inspections and things as well, and the importance of them. And obviously, there's been a lot of challenges with inspections, obviously with access and things over the last couple of years. Obviously with the pandemic and lockdown and all the rest of it. But we touched on the referencing process there and the importance of that. So let's have a chat about obviously referencing and fees and deposits and things as well. Now the Tenant Fees Act made landlords responsibility for the cost of referencing, credit checks and creating tenancies and things and preparing inventories. However, there are still some confusion among landlords and tenants over any expectations of what is mandatory or optional. So let's have a wee chat about clearing that up and who's responsible for doing what and what is required through the whole referencing and deposits side of things prior to a tenancy beginning. Do you want to run through some of the points, Karen?
Yes, so there are requirements for references and credit checks, but skimping on them is a false economy. Yeah. So we've had a perfect example that I use when I'm meeting with new landlords for when it comes to carrying out credit checks. Is basically I had somebody one day that said, no, my credit check is fine. The bank statements looked all right. But when we ran this credit check, there was £20,000 worth of CCJs on that reference report. So this is such an important thing to take into consideration. These are things that might cost you a little bit in the start, just obviously for using individual companies to run credit checks, but they are so beneficial for throughout the tenancy. They're essential to gauging the tenant's stability and ability for paying the rent. And you'll need them to qualify for rent guarantee insurance, which right now is quite a sensible precaution to take.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the referencing process is so important, and I think it is that there is two sides to that, and there's the on paper side of it, but there's also, like you say, using your intuition and drawing for experience on previous years and things as well to pick up red flags when you meet people and get that feedback and whether they're, I mean, and it may not be that the person themselves, they might just not be the right fit for that property. Again, it's obviously
very much taking both sides into consideration when you are referencing someone. Like I like to do the viewings, and obviously I've reviewed the paperwork as well, so I'm matching up both sides of somebody's application as to what they've been like in person versus what they're like on paper. You'll come across some people that just, and you just quite good judge of character when it comes to things like this, and you just get a feeling it's just like they're just not the right fit for the property, unfortunately. Or likewise on paper, they could be great in person, but they just don't match up on paper. So it is putting very much those two sides together to find the right fit for it.
Yeah. When it comes to like referencing fees and things are in Scotland, obviously that is down to the landlord to cover referencing fees. I do remember the first few years when I started doing lettings that at that point it was the tenant that was responsible, but that obviously changed when the new laws and things were brought in, so that's a landlord's responsibility to do that. So no referencing fees and things can be charged to a tenant. But what about security deposits and things, Karen? I'm going to just the sun's coming in my yeah, the sun's coming in my, so I'm going to just give me a second.
Positioned over here. Yes, so when it comes to deposits, a landlord can take up to 2 months deposit. So typically for ourselves, it tends to be 1 month deposit, and if there is a pet, taking a larger pet deposit. So very much it is based on the tenancy itself, but a landlord can take up to 2 months. So when we come onto the topic of a pet deposit, this is something that is obviously taken into consideration when somebody has pets in the property, and very much based on what type of pets they have. So this can be anything from £200 upwards. So again, it's very much tailored to our average for it is around about £200 in addition to the first month's rent for a pet. But again, it is very much dependent on the pet itself and how many they have. If they have 2 pets, we would tend to take a bit more. If it's a larger property, again, we would tend to take a bit more. Or obviously, another thing that can be stipulated in the tenancy agreement is for them to have the property professionally cleaned when they move out, including the carpets.
Yeah, that's something that we do an enter checklist letter that goes out to tenants prior to them vacating, and it's stated in that as well that obviously professional cleaning of the carpets and things is required if you've got pets and things as well. Just to return it to as close to what it was when the tenancy was started. Obviously, if it's a longer term tenancy, we do take into consideration that wear and tear and things, obviously, over a certain period of time. So 2 months maximum deposit. We don't generally do that, although legally you can. I think it's quite a lot for 2 months deposit, and then
when you're taking up front as well, it can be a lot for people, especially if you've got a higher end property as well, and you're bringing in quite a high end rent. Asking somebody to pay effectively 3 months rent, well, the equivalent to 3 months rent up front, it's a lot for somebody, and it can potentially lose you out on tenants because people just can't afford that initially. Yeah. So it's obviously, that's why we tend to do 1 month up front, and thankfully for us, it tends to cover anything that it needs to at the end of the tenancy. But obviously there is that stipulation that you can take up to 2 months.
Yeah, and again, back to the pet thing, people are quite willing to pay an extra deposit for pets, and I think that demonstrates on their part their seriousness of taking on the tenancy if they're willing to put more money down to obviously secure the property and have held to the fact that they're going to look after it. So I think that's a real green flag, I would say. People are rather than a red flag. That's quite a good one.
When I've got somebody that's quite willing to pay a pet deposit, it tends to be because they know they're going to get it back at the end of the tenancy, and they have that trust in their pet that they're not going to cause the damage to lose them their money. Yeah. So like you say, it very much is a green flag. I've never actually had somebody that's like, no, I'm not paying a pet deposit, but if we did, that would be like, well, that's a complete red flag. So no.
And I think that's quite a positive thing, because you're right, we don't really get, I'm not paying that. People that have, because I think people that are serious pet owners and things do, God, we could talk about pets and tenancies all day, but they do obviously generally are really forthcoming and quite transparent and really happy to do that, which shows the majority of pet owners are really good tenants. So I think it's because a lot of people just fixate on the horror stories, because there are some out there. All part of the referencing process. But deposits, most importantly, obviously, are lodged in a deposit scheme. There is 3 in Scotland. We've got a Safe Deposit Scotland account, and that needs to be done. How long do we have to do that again, Karen? That's
yes, so you must put your tenancy's deposit in the deposit protection scheme within 30 days, and tell them where it is. So for example, if it's in Safe Deposit Scotland, they should get confirmation of that and reference to their DAN number as well, which is the tenant specific reference code for their account. If you don't, you could be ordered to return it and even pay 3 times the original amount. So you could also limit your ability to regain possession of your property.
Yeah, that's important.
Very topic when it comes to deposits and making sure it is lodged in a deposit protection scheme.
Yeah, they are important points there. Definitely, obviously, you can, if you do not lodge that in time or do not have it lodged at all, you can be charged up to 3 times the amount of the deposit which you have obviously taken as a penalty. But on top of that, it could then make it very difficult for you to regain possession if that's what you intend to do. So if things have went sour and you want to take back the property, and the tenant does not agree, and then they find out that you've not actually lodged a deposit, or or God forbid, your agent hasn't done it on your behalf, then that could land you in hot water and make things really difficult. So please, if you're self-managing, make sure you have a deposit scheme open and have your deposits lodged in that within 30 days of the start of the tenancy. Now, we do have some self-managed properties which we find tenants for and allow the landlords, as long as they work solely with us anyway, but they like to self-manage, but we let them use our account. But I mean, you can set up an account, it doesn't cost anything to do that, but they just think it's a lot easier to allow somebody, because there's a whole process with the getting back the deposit and things, whether there's a claim or not. So that could be time consuming as well. So
I think in Safe Deposit Scotland or just deposit protection schemes in general are something that are changing their processes as we go. So yep. This is another thing that we have to keep up to date with and make sure that we know how the process is being going through it, and just making sure that we're taking the right steps to, if there is a claim, obviously make the strongest claim possible to get that back. But one thing we will highlight is this is a legal requirement to have your deposit in a deposit protection scheme.
Yeah, and I think just before lockdown and the pandemic and all the rest of it, Karen, I think there was a lot of changes started with the deposit schemes and things, and even just down to the terminology that you use in inventories and the wording of things and the whole process. And we actually invited them along to sit with us and go through it so that we were doing it properly on behalf of landlords. And that's what I say about the continual training and updating ourselves on legislation and how things are done properly, because ultimately that is what people pay us to do. And a lot of landlords that self-manage maybe don't have that knowledge, or don't have the facility or the time or the facilities to keep up to date like that. So rather than leave yourself in hot water, have somebody do it for you. If you are a self-managed landlord and don't have the time to keep up with the legislation and the law, and keep on the right side of it, is so important. So that's referencing fees, deposits and things covered. Can be a bit of a minefield, and is a really important part of the process. So please pay attention. So let's talk about mid-tenancy inspections or periodic inspections and maintenance and things, Karen. So as you said, inspecting your rental property during the tenancy and keeping on top of maintenance is really an essential part of having an excellent relationship with your tenant, keeping repairs and costs down, keeping the landlord happy. However, there are some rules to remember and boxes to tick when you are arranging works and access and things to properties. Karen, you've done a lot of years in property management where you were frontline arranging inspections, carrying out inspections, and obviously maintenance and things as well. So give us some examples that you've done throughout your time and things that are important.
Yes, so one of the key things is, unless it's an emergency, you cannot enter your tenant's rental property without your tenant's permission. So even if you give them 24 hours notice, you cannot just be going into their property. That is such an important one for new landlords that are not aware of that. To be honest, to me, it just seems like common sense. Like, don't go in someone's property unless you have permission. Yeah. But you would be surprised. So that is a key one to remember, because it can get you in hot water if you do not apply with that. So
it's surprising. Sorry, it's surprising how many landlords and things just don't. I mean, to us, we think that's like, obviously you can't just walk in a property. You can't walk in their home. They are legally the tenant in that property, and you need to go through the right process before you could access or have their consent to do so. Although I know in extenuating circumstances and things, we can arrange access with keys and things if we deem it necessary, but there needs to be cause to do so, and we need to still have to follow a process in order to do that. A lot of self-managed landlords surprisingly still think they have the right to just walk into a property, and that is incorrect. And like you say, Karen, it could really land you in hot water with the law if you're doing that without probable and correct cause and following the right routes to do that.
I think even just to have a smooth running tenancy as well, you don't want to be just showing up at your tenant's property. It makes them very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Just to have a better relationship with your tenant, just give them a bit of notice, send them a message, get in contact with them, arrange a time that suits the both of you to go out, and obviously just to have that smoother running tenancy, because nobody wants anybody just showing up at their house. whether it's inside or outside. It makes somebody very uncomfortable, and it can lead to your tenancy becoming a bit toxic because you've built up this relationship on grounds that really shouldn't have been started in the first place.
And you run the risk of it could actually be looked at as harassment. If it's not done correctly and you're continually maybe turning up at a property or basically hounding a tenant without the correct reason to do so, it can be obviously then put down as harassment, and that could again obviously lead to further implications to you as the landlord for not following lettings law and staying on the right side of it, which is what obviously the topic is for today. What else, Karen?
Next point, so safety certificates.
Yeah.
Keeping an eye on expiry dates for safety checks and certificates for gas, electric, smoke alarms, NE2 performance, Legionella, PAT testing. I could go on, there's plenty of them. Yep. So again, these are all things that we have to keep up to date with, but making sure that they are renewed on time can avoid a hefty penalty.
So, I mean, paramount for me is obviously gas safety. Annual check needs to be done. It's one of the most important things in my opinion, but obviously we've got a lot of the new or more recent, which is obviously the EICRs, electrical safety, your hardware smoke alarms and things, which everybody will be aware of now, because even private residential, private residents, as opposed to residential letting and things as well, all have to have interlinked smoke alarms and heat detectors. And so yeah, there's a lot of important things there that need to be kept up to date.
So obviously, going on from safety certificates, you are also legally responsible for maintaining the structure of your property. So there's various things to take into account for aspects of this to make sure your property is kept obviously maintained and looked after and not causing any issues for the tenant or for the structure of your property. So things to check for when you are doing inspections are signs of checking for damp, mold. So obviously when there's a very much a difference between damp and mold. So making sure this is something that I'm very experienced on all the inspections that we have done.
This is something you get a lot, Karen.
Right. So knowing the difference between damp and mold is a key one for landlords. So there's a difference between you having water ingress in a property, so water that is penetrating from the external into the property and causing damp is something that a landlord has to get addressed, and sooner than later. There are steps that obviously I'll cover just now that can prevent things like that occurring, little things to look out for. Yeah. But if that is the stage that your property is at, get it fixed as soon as possible from the external and work your way in. There is no point in you fixing the decoration or the plaster or anything internally until you have fixed that external issue that is causing it. We've had that before, and it's pointless. You're wasting your money. So establishing what is causing the water ingress and fix it from the outside, and then address inside once it's had a chance to dry out. Mold, on the other hand, is something that is caused by condensation most often than not. So tenants not ventilating a property, to be honest, it is something that it happens. Yeah. It's unavoidable. If you are showering in a property, if you're living in a property, you have the chance of having mold in it. So making sure your tenant is educated on ventilating the property. So this can be from opening the bathroom window, leaving it open for a while after they've come out the shower, especially if this is a family unit and you are in and out of the shower multiple times a day. You're going to have a bigger buildup of condensation and most likely a bigger buildup of potential mold as well. Making sure extractor fans are working correctly when doing inspections of properties is also another good one, to make sure that the hot air is being sucked out and preventing any additional moisture building up in the property. But when you do have situations of mold, there is steps that can be taken. So obviously getting a mold and mildew spray, even some bleach and warm water will wipe it down as well. So keeping on top of it is the key thing. If you are a tenant watching this, please do not be a tenant that just lets it grow along your wall until it gets to a point where you're complaining to your landlord. It is just needing wiped down. And it is something that is easily avoided if you keep on top of it.
I think as well, ventilation is key when it comes to obviously preventing mold and things, like you say, obviously keeping the air circulating. And sometimes if it's maybe a property that a landlord's maybe just taking on and they're not aware of maybe there's ventilation problems there, if you don't make your landlord or agent aware, they're not going to know to then maybe, maybe there's a fan that needs to go in that bathroom because maybe opening the window is not enough, or do you know what I mean? The kitchen needs a fan, or do you know what I mean? Or there needs to be trickle vents on the windows to let. Do you know what I mean? So they're all small changes that can be done that can prevent a much bigger problem. But unless it's brought to attention or picked up, then it's not going to get rectified. So I think, speaking from experience, and I know you would agree, Karen, that if the tenant feels that that's a problem, please bring it to our attention. And it could be sorted sooner rather than later. Further down the line, it's going to be something that's going to be harder to fix and then obviously repair, because damage has been caused throughout a longer period of time.
And again, like we said, you can look out for when doing regular inspections of the property to stop it escalating to points such as that. So checking that there's no blocked gutters, slipped roof tiles, cracked rendering, rotting woodwork are all the telltale signs of leaks that will cause into like your ceilings for the property, or obviously, I mean, choked gutters I think is the most common one that I've seen. There's some growth in the gutter and it's just the water's obviously not able to escape, so it is just basically going back into the property again, and you'll get big watermarks on walls, and that is just is not the easiest or the most pleasant to have to fix internally, but it is such an easy fix from outside. So these are all things that you can have a look at to make sure that you're not getting any water ingress to properties. Even like little internal leaks, like making sure that under the sink all the pipes are all still secure and they're not leaking at all, or next to your boiler or water tanks as well. A telltale sign that you're having a leak from your boiler is the pressure keeps dropping. So obviously quite often, more than not, pressure will drop occasionally on a boiler, so it's a good thing to educate your tenant on how to top it up, so you're not getting that call out, my boiler's not working, when all it is the pressure needs topped up on it. So good thing to educate your tenants on when you're doing a move-in, and also water tanks as well, just make sure that they're not leaking.
Yeah, I think like you said there, Karen, the emphasis of inspections is to pick up things before they become a bigger problem. And I think people concentrate on the internal of the property quite a lot, but they forget that the external of the property is quite important as well. Like you see, gutters and slip tiles and things, if they're spotted early enough and sorted, it could be a really minor repair that could stop a bigger problem. So yeah, perimeter walk and check of the external of the property and things is so important as well. And something obviously you have, and we all have put into practice over the years, and know that is an important part of inspections. So yeah, that's an important thing. Angela's chipped in here saying, just as we spoke about, window trickle vents are key to be kept open. I think that's definitely for circulation, and there's great products out there to help clean. Mold and mildew sprays are less invasive, and you just spray and walk away with these things now. You could just spray them on, leave them, and then just wipe it away, and do you know what I mean? It's not like you're having to sand and scrub and things as well, but there are ways to try and prevent it before it gets to that.
Yeah, we have it now as well. When we do inspections, we actually keep a mold and mildew spray in the car. So if tenants are having issues with it, if they're happy for us to spray it in their home, because obviously it is quite a strong smell.
I mean, it can be potent, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll give it a spray, and they see just how you don't have to scrub it, you don't have to clean it. You literally just spray it, open up the window so there's ventilation, and walk away basically, and it cleans itself, and it'll just take it right off your wall. There's no damage to the paint more often than not. So it's really beneficial to have, and it's easy just to show them how easy it is to get rid of it, and then obviously they're then educated for going forward to be able to do it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it is really worth getting all these right, because the knock-on effects of getting them wrong can be really substantial, from decorating relations, from deteriorating, relations with your tenant, to large repair bills that can have been avoided by spotting things early on, like I say, and even down to legal costs and financial penalties, or even prison if you get these things wrong. I mean, obviously there's been stuff in the news down in England recently about obviously the implications of what damp and things could have an effect on people. So please be aware that these are important things to have addressed and picked up on really early on. And you've just demonstrated quite a lot of good ways to do that, Karen, so thanks for that. So next topic, let's head on to handling arrears disputes. Something that I think I mean, as part of lettings, it does happen. I mean, this is a small percentage, but it is part of the industry, and there are proper ways to deal with it. at some point in a landlord's life, you will probably have to deal with a missed rental payment or some sort of disagreement over rental payment. And it pains us to say, but most landlords lose disputes because they don't set things up correctly in the first place, or because they handled things in the wrong way when the problem or issue comes around. So there are ways to do it correctly. You got any pointers on that, Karen, for us today?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. The main one out of it all is stay calm.
Yeah.
Although the situation may be frustrating, letting your temper get the better of you rarely gets the result that you want. And it is also illegal to threaten or harass your tenant. As annoying as the situation can be, obviously keeping your calm is the main thing out of it. I know more often than not, people will not want to, but for their own sake, if not anything, you have to remain calm in the situation. So
I think people let their emotions take over quite a lot, and it's something you need to be aware of. So
it can, and it can be really frustrating. So we can see how it happens, but you just need to try and take a step back and just take a breath and just obviously assess it from there. But getting onto arrears right away in a firm but fair manner is such an important thing when dealing with arrears. So trying to nip it in the bud. Your tenant, more often than not, if they've got themselves into a situation, they're not going to be able to pay everything back at once if they want to stay. So agree to a payment plan that they can stick to. So I've had it before, and tenants try and set up a payment plan for something that's just unattainable. And in my own experience, I'm not letting them agree to that amount because I know they're not going to be able to pay that. It's not feasible. So it's setting an amount that they're going to be able to stick to it, because then a landlord can see, do you know what, they are sticking to this payment plan. They are making an effort to repay it. Whereas if it's something unattainable, they're going to slip on it, and it's just going to make themselves in just the same situation that they are, but aggravate their landlord even more. So making sure that you're sticking to an affordable payment plan is quite an important one with a tenant that is cooperating with you to try and rectify their account. Because at the end of the day, especially just now, people can get themselves into situations where they are struggling to pay for their food and their utilities, might as well their rent. So making sure, just trying to establish that with a tenant first and speak to them and say, look, what's your situation? And it's different if they're jetting off on holiday and they're still in rent arrears, but sometimes it is just a case of people are struggling with the day-to-day costs just now. So
yeah, we are seeing it with the cost of living crisis and things, but generally they're willing to work with us, and we are willing to obviously help them and give them the right advice and help them retain their tenancy and things, and work with them. Like I said, we as landlords and agents and things have a duty of care for tenants that are in a property, and we take that quite seriously.
And as a tenant, the best advice I can give if you're in this situation is please do not bury your head in the sand. This is not an issue that will go away. You have to speak with your landlord and be honest with them. And like we say, try and set up an affordable payment plan or come to an agreement with them. So you're making an effort to rectify it and they can see that, rather than just avoiding phone calls or avoiding letters, because you are just going to make the situation worse for yourself and eventually risk losing your home over it when it could have been addressed in the first place and rectified.
Yeah, Jeanette makes Jeanette's saying great advice. Use payment plans before, and it's worked well. Do you put yours in writing? Yeah, well, I mean, we would have a lot of obviously face-to-face. If it comes to the point where we're establishing payment plans and things, we're obviously having a sit-down conversation about it, more than likely. But we will follow up maybe with an email and things, and just confirm what we've agreed so that it's there in writing and we've got a record of that, Jeanette. Yeah.
Yeah, just if it does go to the point where that's not being stuck to and it is going through the eviction process, if it does escalate to that point, it is something that's beneficial to have in writing, because you're going to need all the documents that you have available basically to put your claim together for an eviction on rent arrears. So saying that you have had payment plans and keeping a close track of the rent that's been coming in. Obviously the benefits of having a managed landlord is you get your statements anytime that there is money coming in or out. So it's quite beneficial to be able to show, obviously, if a tenant's missed a payment, or we have obviously a tenant's account as well. So we have detailed records of what's been in and out for a specific tenant, to show this is the arrears that have escalated, this is when they've been due from, this is when payments have been missed, or likewise if payments have been made, it will show as well. So when it comes to rent arrears, it is quite handy to have all these detailed records, because you might well need them if it does unfortunately come to the point of an eviction.
Yeah, you will need all that to back up what you are putting forward if you do get into that situation. That is worst case scenario, but be prepared for it. Always be prepared, I think, is important.
Prevention is better than, what's the saying for it? Basically, be prepared.
Yeah. Also, I think it makes sense to make sure you start your tenancy with a professionally prepared and signed inventory with photographs. Without one, you're almost guaranteed to lose any dispute or claim, especially obviously, like say you've got the deposit scheme in place. And although inventories are not mandatory, they are a key part in making any claim against a deposit. And I mean, you'd be very hard pushed to be successful with a claim without one. They are worth their weight in gold to have a detailed and comprehensive inventory in place at the beginning.
Yes,
and like you said, Karen,
that have said, oh, I don't want one because the property is not furnished. Well, it's not.
Yeah, get that a lot.
You have someone that's doing an inventory correctly. This will take into account your flooring, the decor, the cleanliness, right down to the sockets, your garden, the meter readings, everything.
Yeah.
So it should be something that is as comprehensive as possible. Obviously, there are contractors out there that carry out inventories, and we have a very good one that is just extremely detailed. So when it does come to a deposit claim, if need be, it is something that is essential. Obviously, during the time that I've been doing this, I've seen a big change from what's required from inventories. So obviously, there was a time in the past where we would be able to reuse them if it wasn't too long in between tenancies. That is not the case now. A new inventory does have to be carried out at the start of every new tenancy, and ideally a day or two before it, so it's as accurate as possible. This is something that has to have pictures, descriptions, ideally timestamps as well for it. So landlords that try and do them themselves, I tend to send them over a sample of what they would be paying for an inventory. And when they see it, they're like, right, please just arrange it, because they see how much detail's in it. And it's something that as a landlord, you're probably not going to be able to do as well as you would need to if there was a claim for it.
Yeah, the inventory clerks, and especially our inventory clerk, does do quite a comprehensive report, and they are really, like I say, worth their weight in gold to have that in place. And as you said, Ken, a big reason why landlords use managing agents is to keep a degree of separation and perspective in the event of arrears and a dispute and things, because you've got that person and who is mediating in between yourself and the tenant. So it makes it a lot easier. And if you would want to speak to myself about that kind of process, then please do so. You've got all my details. You can message me on here. And also, we have a previous blog which looks at deposit disputes. And you could find that on the Fife Properties website under our vlogs, and it's titled Deposit Disputes, funnily enough. So finally, let's have a chat about getting your property back, and if that is something that you need to do. There are a lot of different rules depending on the different parts of the UK, which affect landlords and how they can regain possession of their properties. The law is broadly similar to England, but we do differ in Scotland. So England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but for Scotland it is quite different. I mean, like I say, Wales and England are fairly similar, but we do differ in our lettings law, and you need to be aware of those differences. It's essential to understand the rules whenever you own a rental home, what your position is as a landlord legally. There are lengthy government pages covering tenancy law in Scotland and the rest of the UK, but there are some main points about regaining possession of the property that you need to be aware of. And I think first and foremost, and we kind of touched on it earlier, Karen, was don't be tempted just to go and change the locks on your property. That is a big no-no, no matter how difficult or behind people are with their rent. This is a serious offence to do that, and you must go through the correct legal channels to do any regain of possession of a property. You cannot just go and change the locks. Now, there's like I say, a lot of differences between Scotland and English law. In England, you can serve a Section 21 notice. England, Northern Ireland and Wales, you can serve a 21 without giving any reason, subject to at least 4 months of the tenancy having run and not before the minimum fixed period ends. Now that's England, remember, just pointing this out as a difference. So if you haven't protected the tenant's security deposit or if the local authority has served notice on you for repairs, you're not allowed to serve a Section 21 notice. Again, that's England, just to clarify. Scotland and Scottish law, Karen, do you want to cover that for us?
Yeah, so obviously the differences between English, Wales, Ireland law and compared to Scottish law. So in Scotland, Section 21 notices have to be abolished, and you can't serve notice without reason for your tenants breaching their agreement. So you can serve a Section 8 notice, known as a notice to leave in Scotland, even during the initial fixed term. So in Scotland, our leases roll on a month-to-month basis now. So there is different regulations for a landlord serving notice to a tenant serving notice. So as we say, this goes on a month-to-month basis. There are no fixed terms in Scotland anymore. So if a tenant is wishing to hand in notice, it's 28 days that they have to give. For a landlord, there is different notice periods for it. Obviously, the situation we're in just now has kind of made it a little bit different.
Yeah.
But for a landlord to serve notice, but typically, for a landlord to serve notice in Scotland, you have to have just reason to do so. You cannot serve a notice just for the sake of it. You have to have either be selling the property, moving back into it, rent arrears, antisocial behaviour. There's various causes that you can serve on, but you have to have a reason to do so.
Yeah, there has to be grounds to serve notice, and they need to be valid. Now, obviously, that is different at the moment. We do have the new legislation which has implemented the moratorium on evictions and obviously the rent freeze. Now, the moratorium at the moment is running until March, the end of March this year. This year coming, so 2023. Hopefully that won't change. Up until that point, there is a ban. In essence, there's a ban on evictions, but there are instances where you can serve a notice on your tenant. Now, they would need to be in 6 months arrears. They would need to be obviously engaging in antisocial behaviour and things as well. So there is grounds where you can still do that, but things like antisocial behaviour, you would need to obviously be able to prove that and have a record of that, like how you say, Karen, communication and things, a clear record of communication and evidence that there is antisocial behaviour in order to issue a notice. And again, obviously, if you're issuing a notice on arrears, you need to have a clear record of what those arrears are and how they've accumulated, and that you have demonstrated clear assistance to the tenant in order to rectify their arrears and obviously pay them off, and that they have not obviously obliged to that. These are all, like you say, if you get to that point of being at a tribunal or court or whatever, then you need to be able to prove that. So that's really important. So when your tenants are seriously behind on their rent, engaging in antisocial behaviour, or otherwise breaching their agreement, there is a lot of things that could come into breach of agreement, like you say, and they could be served under the Section 8 notice, as a notice to leave in Scotland, and that's even during the fixed term. Obviously, at the moment now, obviously there is a mixture of tenancy agreements at the moment, because we have obviously changed to the private residential tenancy in Scotland, but there are still a lot of tenancies that still run on the short assured tenancy. So notices are different on these, depending on the tenancy agreement that's in place.
Yes, so obviously basically paperwork is key on this, and having the evidence if you're going through any type of notice is such an important part. So obviously, on a final note, when it comes to evictions, regardless of whether any eviction bans are in place, going through the courts to regain pattern possession of your property is a lengthy process.
Yeah.
The onus is very much on the landlord to supply the perfect paperwork. So, and the courts tend to side with the tenants when notice is incorrectly served. So they will pick apart any paperwork that you have. So making sure that you have everything correct, as much paperwork in place for it. We've seen cases where even if something has been spelled incorrectly, they will not accept it. So one simple word could ruin your case, basically. So making sure that before you submit anything, you are proofreading it, making sure everything is correct, right down to the punctuation, basically. and that you're supplying all the required paperwork for going through this process. If it does, worst case scenario, get to the point where you have to go to the court to regain possession.
Yeah, it's so important to have the paperwork in order, and even down to things like spelling mistakes. We come across that just through the week. Karen, we took on a property that already had a tenant in place, and the tenancy agreement was passed on to us, and it had a spelling mistake in it, which would make it difficult to then obviously serve notice. I was just going to finish up and say Jim didn't have time to join us because he's been travelling, but here he is. Just in time. We've only got a couple of minutes left. How are you?
I had to join it last minute. Oh, I'm fine. I'm just at the airport. I'm actually in the queue for the passport control. So I need to get my live done for the day anyway. So this is it.
Oh, that's fine.
So
Well, thanks for joining us.
What were we talking about today, Richard?
We were actually just talking about landlords lettings law, and we were just talking about regaining possession of your property there, and the importance of the paperwork and having that in place, and making sure that obviously even things down to a spelling mistake can be an issue if you are in the situation where you're going to have to go to court to
right back to the very beginning. It's essential to get it right in the first place and have the right people in place with the right information and knowing the legislation like the back of their hand is key in everything.
Yeah, we've covered quite a lot this morning in terms of obviously landlords' obligations to abide by the ever-changing legislation and the importance of having an agent that obviously knows what they're doing, acting on your behalf if you've not got time to do that. And we've covered everything from the referencing down to the arrears, and then, like we say, we're just finishing up there on regaining possession legally in the proper way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So just going to finish up there, Jim, but thanks for joining us. So I was just going to finish up and say, Jim, you are on your way to Spain, but you're joining me on Monday, 12:30. We're going to do the 4th instalment of Diary of a Property Investor. So you will be tuning in with myself and going through that on Monday, 12:30. So join us then, guys. That'll be a really good one. Jim's going to continue with his story. As I say, that's the 4th instalment.
I'm going to be talking about, just to recap, I'm going to be talking about the importance of having a system and mentors and books and tapes and upline and where you'll be in the next 5 years, goal setting and things like that as well. So it's probably key and vital important that people tune in if that's what they're wanting to do. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. We've had a lot of interaction today for people, so thanks for joining, guys. Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks, Mick. Thanks, Angela. And thanks, Jim, for joining us just at the end here.
You're welcome.
Have a safe journey, and I will see you on Monday, Jim, with everybody else tuning in for the Wealth Creation Show. And that's it, guys. Thanks for joining as well, Karen. That was a really good cover of things this morning, and thanks for your input on that. And until Monday for me, and next week for the sales show on Saturday, I'm going to say goodbye.
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 See you later, guys.